Welcome to The Change, a podcast about the changes in life that shake, break, and make us. I'm Laura, a 45-year-old writer, podcaster, and mum who has until recently always loved change.
And I'm Cathy, a 53-year-old writer, podcaster, and mum, and change is actually my kryptonite. We acknowledge the traditional owners of country throughout Australia on which this podcast is recorded and recognise the continuing connections to lands, waters and communities.
We pay our respects to Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander cultures and elders past and present.
The Season 2 partner of The Change is Olivio Wellness Skincare, hydrating natural skincare for the over 40s.
Keep listening to the end of this episode for a discount code for your next order of Olivio Wellness products. Hey, Cathy.
Hey, Laura.
Hey. So before we dive into today's chat, it's been a real privilege to get to know today's guest, as she really hasn't had the opportunity to tell her story in her words before now. It's a bit of an exclusive for us, and we're very privileged. We actually decided to make this chat into 2 episodes because we had so much ground to cover, and we just want you to hear it all because she's got so much great, she's got an incredible story and a lot to say. So tell us, Cathy, who is it?
Today's guest is Georgia van Cuylenburg, an actress, TV host, comedian, producer, activist, and philanthropist. At 2.5, a traumatic event defined her purpose, and at the age of 12, she decided that one day she would leave Australia and move to Hollywood. She's now been living in the US for 19 years. She's the founder of the charitable organisations Arts Bridging the Gap in the US, Hearts for Community Action in Uganda, Women's Community Leadership Program in Ethiopia, as well as an owner of I Am Spartacus Entertainment. Georgia is an outspoken advocate for global human rights and ending childhood trauma, and speaks internationally about children's rights, poverty alleviation, youth empowerment, the power of art to create change, and ending homelessness. She is also a global advocate for the autoimmune condition alopecia areata and a vocal supporter of mental health awareness and solutions. Australian listeners may well know Georgia's brothers, Hugh and Josh, from their podcast, The Imperfects.
Before we jump in as well, we want to add a note on our content today. This episode contains discussions of child sexual abuse, eating disorders, and complex PTSD. We understand if this episode is not for you. Links to support services are in the show notes. Hi, Georgia. Thank you so much for joining us on The Change.
It is my absolute pleasure. Nice to be connected to Australia, even from here.
I guess I wanted to start because your name will be very familiar, I expect, to our Australian audience who know of your brothers Hugh and Josh and their podcast, The Imperfects. And prior to The Imperfects, Hugh ran the Resilience Project in schools and communities around Australia, which in part was inspired by you, your story, your struggles with an eating disorder. Are you able to tell us a little of your childhood experiences, which, are obviously quite traumatic? So we'll go gently, whatever you're comfortable with talking about, and how they changed you.
Yeah, thank you for that. I want to sort of put a quick trigger warning to the stuff I'm about to share can be tough to hear. My brothers are doing really important work, and I'm so proud of them, but it hasn't come without its twists and turns for all of us. I'll start right from the start, which for me wasn't something I knew. So I guess it's important as people hear this that I didn't know what had happened to me at 2.5 until 2008. My body knew, and all my behaviors were very much informed by it. But I had done the thing that I always thought, if someone said to me memory regression, I was like, oh, sure. Like, I think that's what therapists use to try and explain stuff. So I know it must have happened because I wouldn't believe it myself. I've had it confirmed now. So that is a big step in Hugh and my journey together. But to start at the beginning, at 2.5, we were at my grandparents' house in Sydney, and we'd been told not to go outside in the front for obvious reasons, it turns out. It wasn't a very safe area. And Hugh and I probably led by me because I was the rebel and he was the terrified of everything person. So with that, I went out to the front to play and dragged him along. And during that experience, I didn't know he was there. So in my memory, for a very long time, I didn't realize he was with me. So I tell the story as I know it now, but for a long time, my memory was I went out by myself. I went out and a man came in through the front of the yard and said he was a friend of our grandpa's. And now I know that Hugh ran back inside and left me. I thought for many years that I was by myself and this man picked me up and he did things to my body and put his hands in places that I can still feel today when I talk about it. And that's what it's so important for people to know, that no matter how much you heal, your body still holds on to these cues. And that's why we need to be super sensitive with folks that have these traumas. He touched me in places. And then I think, and this is my blackout moment, I think I pushed away or he was done or whatever. And I really have a feeling for him now of he was just a very damaged, hurt person and my body got in the way. That's sort of the way that I see it. And I feel very sorry for him, because what a man would have to have gone through to want to do that to a 2.5-year-old.
That's incredibly generous.
Incredibly gracious of you.
Thank you. It's the only way my heart can hold it in a way that doesn't feel combative, part of that. But also I know I've done it, and we can get there later. I've done a lot of work, and I have dear friends that were in jail for a long time for doing not similar, but getting in trouble for things that are related to young people. And I love them. I don't like what they did. I hate what they did, and they hate what they did too. But I also love many things about them. So it's important for me to see that person as a complex person that was hurt. And I wish we lived in a world where back then you could have talked about trauma and maybe they could have got help. But my body was there. The really important part of all of this is I went inside and hid in my grandparents' pantry and decided in that moment that no one could handle this. No one should know. And so this little 2.5-year-old realized that if I say this out loud, there's going to be anger, there's going to be sadness. This can't be. So I kept it a secret and did a really good job of that, apparently, because I forgot too. And then what progressed was many years of, we've fact checked it. Mum said, yeah, that was the time when you became an anxious child. That was when you started. I used to do this horrible thing to poor men in stores where I would like giggle and smile and wave and they would come towards me and I'd scream. So a lot of clues were there. And I was very, I don't want to say promiscuous because it paints a picture that's not true, but I was very curious sexually, like, I wanted to look at the bits and show the bits to when I was 4 and 5, I got in trouble in 2nd grade because I was curious, like doing a silly thing with boys, all very in this, I don't understand what these bits are and why does it make me feel the way. So we can look now, and I'm so grateful that we live in a world now where those cues are cues for teachers and for parents. Back then it wasn't. It was just this, we said these horrible things like there's something wrong with this child, as opposed to what happened to this child. And I'm really glad we're in a world where they ask that question now most of the time. Anyway, fast forward a little bit. Although I lived in this beautifully happy family in many ways, we had so much laughter, so much love, so much intellect and lots of talking. And my brothers and I literally raised our voices once, each one of us as kids. Josh put a hand through a wall at one point. Other than that, really pretty happy on the surface, but I was so unhappy. I didn't feel like I belonged in my family all my childhood. And that was partly because I was so outgoing and everybody else was very like, don't be so outgoing, it's embarrassing. But also I was trying to say, I don't feel right. This body doesn't feel good to me. And it was really exacerbated by the fact that unfortunately my mum had a lot of body image issues that she was trying to manage. She was beautiful, but her dad had impressed on her that curves were dangerous and he was angry at her for being beautiful. And so no woman can have a daughter and not put that on. Like, it's as much as I wish I could blame my mum, we all like to blame our mums for a certain part of our lives. I can't now be her age that she was when I was little. And if I had a child, it would be impossible for me to not look in the mirror and hold my tummy and be like, oh, it's a bit big today. So that sort of played into a little bit an important detail in the fact that by the time I was about at 11 and 12, and Mum was very conscious about my weight and had me at a dietitian because I was worried about it. And I was just a strong girl. I can now look back and realize I was a shot putter and a discusser and a butterfly swimmer, but it's all muscle. And so I was very uncomfortable in all of this and had big boobs. I stopped growing at 12. So 5'2" and fully developed as a woman with double Ds is a little confusing. Anyway, I started really becoming uncomfortable. Like I got my period, and that was when this body became my enemy, because all of a sudden I realized that I was a woman, and those bits that man had touched made me unsafe. Men started looking at them. Men started talking. Back then, men touched them. They didn't ask. They just, did all sorts. And older men would make comments and stuff like that. So as much as I was playing up to the older men because of everything and didn't understand why, and my parents were like, why does she have crosses on teachers and all that kind of stuff? And it was embarrassing to them. I started really restricting my food. And I am a 100% embarrassed at this point overachiever. Like I will not let something go unless it is done and done. And so became anorexic. Started restricting and really dropped a lot of weight very fast. And unfortunately, of course, boys started paying attention and noticing me. And I got the boyfriend that didn't want to be with me. He wanted to be with my best friend a year earlier. And so I got these reinforcements, and I had something I could control, and my body was getting smaller. So it felt literally like it was taking up less space. It was pointing out less in the world. It was making me less of a target. And it became safe. And I had this real fascination and fixation on being as small and as little and as tiny as possible so that I was safe from male energy. But of course, didn't know why. Lived with Hugh and Josh. Josh was so young, but Hugh was pretty angry about it and made that clear. Mum and Dad tried their best. But I mean, I just have so much compassion for them. It was not fun to be in our family. An anorexic person is fighting everybody else but themselves, because it's easier. When families put a lot of pressure and focus on trying to fix, we can fight them and not our eating disorder and our own mental challenges and physical challenges. And that's why the best thing, in a way, a parent can do is love unconditionally and let the battle be theirs, and not try and restrict and, keep them safe. But my mum is a total fixer. She's too smart. She's way too smart to leave. She wanted to fix it. And Hugh did the opposite and just kind of went, I'm over this. He said at one point, we went to a family therapy, and he said, if you're not better by Tuesday, I'm out. I'm not coming to Unfix again. And probably something he's embarrassed, he said. But it is important, and I feel okay sharing that because he's been very public about how he gave up on.
But for context, how old were you and how old was he at the time?
I think roughly, and it is so funny because Hugh tells these stories with all sorts of random ages where I'm like, that is not when we were there, but cool. Go for it. I don't, with this part of the story, it doesn't matter to me too much, but I think I was about 16.
Yep.
He would have been 19. So he graduated from high school and it was at a point where he didn't want to have to deal with his sick sister.
I have a 22-year-old son and I have 19-year-old daughters. So I can kind of get into the head of a 19-year-old boy and kind of just go, you know what? Yeah, I'm done. Like I can't deal with this. So as heartbreaking as it would have been for you all as a family, I can understand that reaction as a mum.
Oh, 100%. And it's important I think, to share this, is that male dominant brains, people with a lot of masculine thinking traits, that is their choice. They either go into fix or they disassociate. And it's really important. I really love the podcast and what you're doing, because I think it's amazing to hear from women who just have so much more shit going on in their world. We see women lean in so much more than men. And I think it is important to say that, not with any anger, but just like it's literally a biological fact. Like that is how they respond. If they can't fix it, they push away. So anyway, I went through all of this, but I share that because it's important because of what happened when Hugh became well known and the way that it all transpired. I left to America after I graduated, and Hugh and I really floated apart, obviously, because I wasn't in anyone's life, and Josh finished school and I wasn't there. So it was like I chose to come here to spread positive messages for kids, and it also gave me a bit of a chance to start with a new story in a way, or a fresh start. But before I left, I did a play about eating disorders and made my story very public. So I did this play, Read My Lips, and got to win some awards and was on the TV. And because I never wanted this to be secret, I always thought the more secret we make these things, the more sick people become, because there's shame on top, there's guilt, there's not a willingness to share. And like grief, like anything, it needs air. And the more we make people feel bad for having this stuff, the longer it's going to be a problem. So I tried really hard to, as I said, end the silence, and did that, came here, and just to sort of cut to the chase, Hugh started a company based off that journey and started doing all that stuff. And I just sort of watched from afar, wondering what that was that he was doing. And it was also based on his trip to India and watching the difference in kids who had nothing and their mental resilience, and me who had grown up in this perfect world and had such challenges. He started getting a lot of traction and started speaking all across Australia. And it started growing and growing and growing and selling out concert halls and all that sort of stuff. He was doing that, and it felt weird. It felt very
I'm not surprised. Yeah,
that this story was being used with Hugh's an incredible storyteller. And part of that is you can't tell a story without exaggerating or, dramatizing things. And that felt a bit weird too, that there was never like, could you tell me the dates? Could you tell me the things? And it just sort of had evolved into his version of my story. And then in 2008, a situation happened with the man I was dating, and immediately that next day I had this full memory regression of everything that had happened. I could see it. I could see the path. I could feel the man, and called my parents as soon as they woke up. I was just hysterical. I'm not a crier and never had been. And I just couldn't not cry. And we went through the kind of like, could this have happened? Was there a time? Did you notice a difference? And then I just happened to be coming back to Australia a couple of weeks later I have FODMAP malabsorption. Yay, trauma. And so was getting treated for that for the first time ever in Australia, because Melbourne's the home of it, and went back and went to my therapist from my anorexia, the psychiatrist, and said to him, guess what, Bill, this all happened. And he said, I had a feeling after your first session with me. I called them in and asked if anything had happened. And I said, I'm going to treat her as someone that has been, because she's showing all the signs. So there was this sort of little validation.
That's pretty good for you. Like, that's a good outcome, even though you didn't know it at the time.
He's an incredible man. We ended up parting ways because of differing opinions about how to heal from an eating disorder, but I still love him and respect him for helping me come to terms with my body and relationships. So all of this to be said, told the boys, and again, Hugh shut down, as is his way of coping. Josh leaned in because that's Josh's way of coping. And then sort of left it there. And then we, as a family, tried to create this world post this happened to us. And I think in a way it was a blessing for my parents, because they'd held so much guilt around what had happened. And, no family and no trauma lives in isolation, but certainly there'd been a trigger that they didn't know about, and they could form a friendship and a relationship with me based on a new start in a way. And we now are very, very close and know our limitations and know our differences, but there's no annoyed with mum and dad moments anymore. Thank goodness, because I didn't want that for the rest of our lives. Anyway, Hugh went off and became very successful and very well known in this story. Unfortunately, he texted me and asked if he could start talking about the sexual trauma. And I said, we need to talk on the phone. And he didn't want to do that. And he left it for a while and then just started talking about it. And that was very confusing to me. And as they grew and the podcast happened, and it just constantly felt like, I think I should be consulted at some point here. And I didn't know how to broach that because we had such a like sort of don't talk about the bad stuff relationship. And when his first book was coming out, we were given a gift in that chapter that he wrote, because he wrote, I'm more than the loss of potential in my sister was a line he had at the end of the chapter where he tells what happened to me. And I said, no, I will not allow you to do that, because you have the opportunity to tell a story of hope for victims of trauma. Like, I'm not someone that wants to reel off their resume, but I send him a long voicemail and I was like, you don't know me. And I sort of went into this. I was like, I started a nonprofit here. I started two nonprofits in Africa. I have lived in a country by myself on my own for this long. I volunteer every day. I was like, Hugh, we used to watch Star Wars every day and I'm in Star Wars. Like, what exactly potential-wise your sister would meet that she hasn't? And we got on the phone that night and did a 3-hour call. And it was a lot of like, he said, I feel like you've deserted me. And I said, I feel like you've deserted. Like, we just put it all out there. And there was anger to share, but not in angry ways. And that was the beginning of the healing. We're still going through it and hard because he's got such a big life with his kids. But we love each other so much. Something happened recently where I broke my foot and he couldn't have been more involved and caring. And it was the perfect example to me, ladies, of like, when a man has a broken foot, he can do that. He can fix that. You can take to the doctor. And it was the first time I'd really seen him just pick up the phone and get involved. And I was like, oh, he was waiting for a broken bone to be able to fix, and these emotional conversations were too hard. And so that was really helpful for me to see that. But we've gone through a lot of it and kind of dealt with a really tricky moment in the second book, which is why I shared the he was there part. I still didn't know he was there. And he called me to tell me he was having his second kid and we were so excited. And then he said, oh, by the way, my second book's going to come out and I talk about how I was there and saw it and didn't tell you. And I went, sorry, what? And I think he thought he'd already told me that he was there. I mean, I really believe that. Our brains can do and make. I mean, look, I that memory out. And I got off the phone and for the second time, the first time being when I remembered my trauma, it was like the ground just disappeared underneath me because now I had to remember an entire moment from my life. And it made so much sense. And this I have a little bit of shame about. All my life I'd resented Hugh. He'd always been so successful and everybody loved him. And there was this sense underneath me of like, if you only knew, I mean, he's cool and whatever, but he's not like the best ever. And that's sort of what everyone would say. And of course, because my mitochondrial cells who hold these memories remembered a big brother leaving me. So I was always going to carry this energy of, if you only knew what he did at the moment I needed him the most. And that helped me learn to heal that in my body where, we never let go of those things completely. Our body cannot let go completely. But now when I feel that come up, I'm like, oh, of course, that's my old body wanting to get mad at my big brother when I'm actually just so happy that he's doing so well. But part of me is like, oh, if you only knew, I'm like, no, don't do that because that's not the truth. That's not actually how you feel. That's your old trauma talking. So second book came out. We had a podcast about that. And now we live in this very strange world where everybody in Australia knows my story and I'm yet to tell it myself. So that also is something that I live with every day. Australian Story tried to do it, but we can talk about that if you want at some point and how that went.
I'm so keen to talk about that because that's how I obviously came across you. I had no idea that, there you were living your life in the US. And I was so horrified when I watched that show because I was thinking, oh, I know of, know the Resilience Project. I know all the things that Hugh and Josh are doing and the good things. But when I watched it, I just saw it through a completely different perspective. I was like, wow, how has this not been told until now? And I can't actually still believe that you haven't had the opportunity to tell your side of the story in a much bigger, broader way And that's no disrespect to Hugh and Josh at all. It's just like that's his story and his version, his business, etc. But you have been through so much, and yeah, I just couldn't believe it. So on sort of day-to-day basis with Hugh and Josh and your family, how is all that now? And what did Australian Story, what were the failings, do you think, of that? You know, where did they not tell enough?
Our family are very happy together, loving. I grew up in a family that didn't talk about hard stuff. And I would describe it as the spin effect. That like if someone, my mum had particularly tried to be angry and everyone would hide in a room and there'd be spin effects that kind of like go down. Like that was how I imagined it. And she gave into that and lived that because I think it's cultural, especially my dad's Sri Lankan. You don't talk about stuff. And my mum came from a very upper crusted sort of, her dad was very conservative, very you don't talk about feelings. And we grew up in that. And I was this little kid that's like, I want to tell you all my feelings about everything. And so somehow, in a weird way, we now live in a family where my brothers professionally talk about feelings.
Yes.
But we don't naturally do it still as a family. We're getting much better at it. And I think that's also generational. I think that's just part of it. I think me getting anorexia kind of forced my parents into a world where they couldn't hide anymore. And they learned a lot about who was really their friend, in those moments, because we went to very buttoned up private school and a lot of families couldn't deal with the skinny girl and what to say. But I do think that, Hugh's wife and I have lovely conversations. Josh's wife and I have lovely, they did really well with Sophie and Penny. Penny is determined to pull down the, curtain too with her OCD. So there's just kind of like the whole family's been led accidentally into this place where we do talk about stuff. If I had one wish in the world, it was that Hugh and I talked about our stuff too. He shares with me challenges that he has, and we do it by voice message. We're almost there. And I know that I just have to take the steps that feel comfortable to him. Josh and I have some really open conversations, but we always did. Josh is a highly emotionally sensitive and aware person, and he was way too emotionally aware to be a little boy in the world he was in. And that caused him challenges. And I'm so happy that he now has this platform where he's celebrated for that. It just, that is my greatest joy in the world, that Josh got celebrated for being the special human that I always knew he was. And ironically, Hugh and I get to now play with this funny game of, I listen to the podcast and I'm like, gosh, that'd be nice if we talked like that.
I think it's, families are like this, aren't they?
Yeah, that's what I was about to say as well, Laura. I think it's one thing to have, family and you've got this stuff going on. But when you are doing things publicly, I know, and I don't share a lot of, and my story is different to yours, but it's one thing for me to be able to write it down or talk about things in a third person or
detached way,
or relate to somebody and say, oh yeah, I had a similar experience, or I understand that emotion because. But when I actually do the work and attach that emotion to myself, it's harder. Now, I do think that it's a little easier because, as you were saying before, women's brains, men's brains, they do this different thing. And as you rightly point out, boys and men who are like your beautiful brother Josh, who are highly emotional, tend to be seen as a little different. Obviously, not trying to get into Hugh's head, not trying to get into your head, but I think you can have a conversation with people and maybe that brings emotions up that you then need to talk to your sibling or your friend or your whatever. I just wonder if this is in some really random way Hugh's way of working through all his therapy.
I think you're 100% right. I think that's where it's been really helpful for me to take the time to see in Hugh the actions that his love for me caused him to take and see it from that. Not from I wish he could, because we could wish whatever we want about other people. We're not them, and we don't have their minds and bodies to define how they do stuff. And my brother did everything he could with the comfortability he had. He started a company and took that story. I think what's very interesting, it's such a really important thing for us all to think. He did what so many people do, which is he moved too fast to fix a problem. He rushed into, I need to fix this and make the feelings in me feel better, the feelings in other people, and I want to help every other kid. What I love about the practices of mindfulness, the practices of pausing and breathing is, and it happens with white saviors. And, I've been accused of being one of those many times because of the work I do in Africa and all that kind of thing. And it causes me to pause and think about that. If we don't pause and think about who our actions affect and who is inspiring our actions, and therefore who do we need to talk to, who do we need to check in with, who do we need to listen to, we can do a lot of damage in our intent to do good. And I think it's a huge lesson when we talk about, like, I'm so excited the world wants to talk about trauma, that the world wants to address trauma as a physical illness. We need to listen to the people who the trauma was done to and not think that we can fix it, because only they can. We can partner with them. It's the great movement right now of an ally, whether it's in racial discussions, whether it's in, feminist issues or gender issues. Men can ally with a woman. They cannot fix the problem. And the same way that Hugh just did what he thought was the best thing to do, which was to fix the problem. And that's where I think it's very exciting that they have this podcast now where they're literally imperfect every week, messing up, showing, because no one can get it right. I've probably messed up 100 times. We all say things we don't mean to say and think about it later. But I think times in our need to move fast and fix fast, we don't think about it. And so that's how I see what Hugh did now. And I'm just blown away that he was willing to publicly say, I messed up. And that's tough also for men, especially he's a super alpha, Mr. Charisma, Mr. Perfect in many ways. And he's now living with a world. And I don't wish ill on anybody, but I think having hard times, having grief, is the thing that makes us the magic person that we.
Yeah.
And there's so much more connection that Hugh and I have now today because he's gone through tough stuff. And there's just a level of compassion that he couldn't have expected to have. To the Australian Story question.
Yes. Thank you.
I was very nervous when they reached out to me. And the producer was amazing and she was so thorough. I mean, God, I got interviewed for 3 hours. And I was thinking, how on earth? And it makes me nervous because I've ended up on the news a lot and had words taken out of context and used against me. We all three of us know how that is done in media very quickly to sell a story. And that's happened to me in very traumatic ways here in LA, that I've had to go through lots of EMDR therapy to be able to get over. So sitting for 3 hours thinking, you're going to use 5 minutes of this and you've got 3 hours to play with, that's really nerve-wracking. I think they did a really good job in many ways. My family are really happy with it. It hurt a little that everyone was so happy with it in my family because I was kind of they said, I feel like it's a really good representation. And I was like, I didn't know that's how you saw me. Okay. And that, I mean, that's just a reality when you leave your family. They are sad that you left and there might be a bit of anger and a bit of confusion. And that came clear in the interview for me. And I had to come to terms with that. It's helped me really reflect on why did I leave? Was it just to spread positive messages? And I think in many ways, I really didn't. I used to say to my parents, I love you too much to live in the same country as you. And I think that sort of pressure to fit into a picture that wasn't who I was really stifling. And I think that that's where I've had to really also balance this fact that this picture has been painted of me in Australia now by my story, through a story that actually hasn't been told by me. And I will tell you, 5 years ago, maybe, I don't know how long Josh and Soph have been married. I was on the way to their wedding 5 years ago, and the guy next to me, we started a conversation, and I mentioned my brother speaks about mental ill health with kids. And he said, oh, is your brother Hugh? And I said, yeah. And he goes, oh, are you the sister? Like I hadn't even got to Australia 5 years ago, and a guy knew me, and he immediately went, goes, "How are you doing?" And
That's hard.
what I'm trying to escape.
Yes.
Is like, and there was just so many people from my past that were pretty public, and you know, it just it feels heavy to be in Australia for me still, and that makes me really sad. But I will say something that's very important, and I spoke to the producers about it. I thought it was really disappointing because the whole concept that Hugh said, "I'm really happy you can do this because you can tell your story in your words." And what happened was they went to tell my story, and we started, and I started telling it, and then they cut to Hugh and he describes it. And I was so shocked. They did it on a podcast episode, and it was funny because I don't know Ryan that well, but I joke about him being my third brother that I've never known. And
the comedian,
sort of have that funny relationship. But he said, we're going to replay some of Georgia and Hugh's interview. Georgia's not actually here, and you don't hear her, but she's there listening to what Hugh's saying. And I just thought that was the most perfect snapshot. That if you're going to talk about my trauma, I need to be in the room.
Yes. Yeah.
And it's really important that I'm able to defend or share or enlighten or give a perspective or correct. And I was just really worried when they did that, and when an Australian Story did that. I've done my therapy. I've done my work. I'm able to talk about it the way I am, but I still feel it in my body. And for a lot of people that aren't able, for whatever reason, to get the help and support to heal their trauma, when someone does that, it is re-traumatizing and triggering for people who are traumatized because they spend their life not sure if their words are enough to tell their trauma. Like, can they say this out loud? Is it okay to claim my story? Will people listen to me if I say what really happened to me? And so when other people tell it first, or just tell it without them there present to discuss or in some way own, it's the worst thing, doing the thing that they fear the most, which is taking the words out of their mouth. That was a little disappointing. And I shared it with them. And if next time you might want to think about that.
Yes. I felt watching it frustrated and horrified for you, actually. And this has come about because of those feelings. So know that as an audience member, I saw through that too. I could see that you needed more airtime, firstly, but also that I wanted to know more about you and your story, because I felt, that it was only very much touched on in that.
Thank you for seeing that. That actually feels really good. And I knew you'd shared like a little when you reached out. It's tough because Hugh's so loved, and I love him just more than all those people. So I don't want to take it away from him at all. It's just important that we make these things as complex as they are, and not sort of
those nuanced conversations that they're hard to have, but we have to have because we live in a world that is getting increasingly grey, but the greyer the space gets, the more black and white answers people are striving for. But actually, when we live in the grey, the answers are also in the grey. It's hard that other people think that it's okay to tell what they think is your story. Your story is your story, right? Our reaction to your story is what we own. In your story, there's parts that Hugh owns, there's parts that family, Josh and your parents, but they're their parts in that story.
Yeah.
The rest of it is your story to own.
And what happened to you.
Yeah. I just struggle with that. Different issues, different reasons. But when I hear people who love me so much, and that's the thing, they love us so hard, and then they kind of tell the story, it feels dismissive of me. You don't get to where you get to because you just woke up one day and thought, oh, you know what? I think I'll just do this. Like that doesn't happen, for most of us. Like we get to a place where trauma happens or our body starts to take on feelings or, whatever it is, or we try and control a situation. For you were trying to control. Again, I don't want to speak for you, but it's a response to what's happened that we get to, and then things happen, and then the big moment happens, and then we explode, and that part of the story that impacts our families or our loved ones. But the stuff that got us to there, that's our stuff. So please don't take that away from us, because we still own that, and we have to live with that trauma and hurt and those feelings in our bodies. And I'm sure you've heard of it. There's this book, The Body Keeps Count, and
The Body Keeps the Score. It's right behind me in blue. Yeah.
Yeah.
One of my favorite books of all
The
time
Body
by
Keeps
Beth
the
Nicole.
Yeah, and he has a line in there that, like, the body keeps count and it always wins, or it keeps a score and it always wins. Again, butchering it, and we'll put the book in the show notes. But the trauma in my body every now and then shows up. And it shows up in moments when I least feel like it should. And then I go, oh, hang on, I'm not walking quite the way I feel like I should be. Or I fell over recently walking. It's like, okay, I need to stop. I need to check in. I need to think and go, what's going on? What's going on now? Why is that showing up? And it's like you say, it holds in your cells. Even when you've done the work, it's still in your body. So you got to keep doing the work every day. You got to show up and do the work. Do you think you needed to go to a different place, to be away, to heal and to find you? And if you'd stayed in Australia, that might have been really hard to do. Like, you might not have got to hear.
100%. You're so right. And thank you for sharing that, because people don't like to admit that they still have residual, even like you can do all the therapy and people want to heal to have been healed. The more I hear that, I'm like, healing has got the wrong connotation. There isn't a state of healed. We are constant in healing because we live in a world where things happen. You can't stop the world from happening to you. And it's a joy to learn more things. And our body is almost like the arbiter of that. Our minds will be really smart if they want us to get something done. But our body will tell us. It's like if we don't sleep, or if we're feeling nauseous, or if our leg drags, these are the signs that our body is saying, I think there's something you need to deal with. And I think when we let our bodies take that role, it's so beautiful. And then the last week, and I know we might get there with this conversation, like my hormones have been really bad. And I've, for one of the first months in my life, been like, I am going to let them lead this week, because they're clearly telling me something. Like, I can push against it, but this is hormone city. And I need to listen and work out. And it was fascinating, actually, to go through that and tell people, because I'm big, like, telling men via text that that's what's going on is so fun. Like, I even wrote afterwards, like, if I don't hear from you again, it's been really nice to text with you. So there's that. But I also want to say, I think I am not a big, like, chauvinist male. Like, I don't like to use terms, because I want men to grow with us and learn with us. And the minute you say chauvinistic or like white supremacist, like when you use those terms, most of those people we need at the table are out the door. So I don't like to do that. But I do think it's really important for us to acknowledge that when you were talking before about how people can sort of do these things with good, they want to help, and their family, they love you. I think it's really interesting to flip it for a second and go, if you had a young person that had been traumatized sexually and you saw them having a tough time, maybe you would think, if you go into a room, it's your job to say, they're having a tough time, they went through this, blah, 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 blah. Let's respect them. And, be not asking, do you want to tell your story, or should I when we go into that room? Think the kindest, most loving, supportive thing they can do is not make you talk about it. It's so simply that someone could just think, I want to love my person so much that I won't make them say it again. And that makes me go, well, of course, because I might do that too. I work with so many kids, right? So many kids that have horrible, horrible things happen to them. And I catch myself occasionally warning people that are about to meet them. Hey, I just want to let you know this person went through the blah, 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 blah. And I'm like, I should not have done that. That is not my job. I need them to meet them fresh and allow them, if they're ready, to say that. But I want to do it out of loving them. So it's a very big lesson for all of us when we look at it. It's a very male thing to lead into the room and solve the problem before the problem gets away from itself. And so that's why I say, like, it's a very masculine trait to try and make the room okay. And to your point, I love grey conversations. I think they are the most honest, open, tricky. I'm on a group right now. We're doing justice and DEI. And the woman on the first day said, I invite this room to be messy. Let's go. And I think it's very feminine in a way to be messy. We're okay with saying, I'm hormonal and I'm probably going to want to eat chocolate and yell at somebody and then cry and then I'll love you and want to cuddle. Like we can I'm not very good at any of that, but to be honest, I'm very masculine in my hormone. I'm like, I need to fix this hormone situation. But women in general are pretty good at that. Whereas men in the gray will go, no, I can't write a report about that. I can't give the solution. I can't tell my wife how it's going to be better. So I'm either going to push away or I'm just going to give the best option I can right now and say it out loud because then I'm done. We really have to grow as a community and say the bravest thing you can do, the absolute bravest, most beautiful, most inspiring, most awful, as in awful, reverent choice you can make is to sit in a room that you don't know what to do in. And you don't know what to say and you do not have the answers and all you can do is learn and you might have got it wrong already and be willing to stay in because the goal that you're going towards is more important than you. And I'm excited because I agree, yes, I think what you were hinting at was a lot of division in the world and that people are really, I actually think, just to be a contrary thought, we're getting closer to being together because I think we push away from something that's difficult before we get there. And I think many generations, we just didn't talk and now we're talking. And so a lot of people are fighting against it because it's uncomfortable, but we wouldn't be feeling uncomfortable unless we were stepping forward. So I don't like it. Like I said, it's ended me up on the news, being called all sorts of things, but I think we're getting there. I can't wait for decades from now where we'll look back and go, ooh, that was messy. But now we do this and now we don't look at people like that. And now we allow people's stories to be there, all that sort of stuff. To your question, Cathy, about moving to America, and 100%, I needed to be anonymous, which was such an irony because I wrote the play. I put myself on the news. I did the PR for it. I wanted my story with my anorexia, but it was mine and it was 100% my story. And I literally wrote my story. But that also became tricky because I was still I still have disordered eating. And even then I was very sick still, but I wanted to show people understanding wasn't immunity. But it was a world and time where people weren't willing to treat that with the way I wanted it to be treated, which was, well, yes, you're going through stuff, but welcome anyway. They just went, oh, you're going through stuff, and sort of pushed away. And I decided at 12 I was moving here anyway. So it wasn't like a knee-jerk reaction. I knew I was moving to Hollywood to not drink, not smoke, not do drugs, and to be a positive role model for young girls because I was seeing Lindsay Lohan and all of that. And I was like, nah. I remember the grade 6 class I made the decision. So it wasn't a knee-jerk reaction, but it was a blessing because I literally showed up knowing one person and got to introduce myself as me. And I couldn't work for the first 8 months I was here because of visa process. And so what's really fascinating is here there's a very strong energy of what can you do for me? It's not the loveliest thing ever, I'll say that much. There's a lot of personality stuff in this city that doesn't fit with me, and that's one of them. Someone coming to a conversation wanting to get something from you. And I'd lived here for 8 months before I could work, so I couldn't get anything from anyone. I just had to meet people. And a lot of those people that I met in those 8 months are still my dearest friends because there was this kind of innocent, like, I'm just here to learn or meet you, and I'm an introvert, so I'm not somebody that's going to go out constantly and meet new people. It's still, I don't, I can't look back and say, well, if Hugh hadn't made the choices he'd made, I would be in a very different place about my trauma. Just this morning, thanks to your questions and reading them and thinking about today, had a conversation with someone about how I really can step into my story in a way that I would normally do. Because I have made a feature film about losing all my hair. I'm a very public healer. I'm writing a book about the freeze response in trauma and through my story and talking about Hugh and me and talking. So this person was like, you just need to do that. Like, you need to claim your story and do it. But I can see how it's held me back with the way the world is now. Everything that happened in Australia very present if I pick up my phone, you know? So the answer is yes. There was a part of starting anew, but I have always been driven by what happened to me by that man to make sure children are okay, that they love themselves, that they know that they are perfect and they didn't cause the big people to do things that have happened to them, and to bring them back to that beauty and innocence. That has always been the only thing that I come home to at the end of the day is, did I do that today? And that's why I got on a plane, because at that point, everyone looked to Hollywood. They still do. And I wanted to be here to tell them that they're okay.
Wow, that's incredible.
So how long have you been there?
19 years last week.
Wow. 19 years. That's amazing.
Yeah.
And you obviously have done so much work. Like, you speak so wisely and you work on yourself, and you're really, I just feel very wise about your own situation, but also knowing what you want to do and how you want to work with the next generation. It's very clear.
Well, I'm fortunate, and I say this to little people as well as, like, young people as well as older people. When you get your purpose at 2.5, it's very easy to be clear. I know there's a lot of people that I'm meeting in their 50s that are still like, I'm just not sure if this is what I'm meant to be doing. And I am so grateful that I never had to ask that question. I was like,
how good's that? In that way.
Sure.
In the pathway. Stem from trauma, obviously.
I certainly do joke that, though, and I did say it in our episode, say that, when people say to me, what do you want to do when you grow up? I'm like, I don't know. I just turned 53. I've got no idea what I want to do. But I kind of do know what I want to do. I'm scared to take the steps to do the thing. Maybe this podcast is the first step in that, doing the thing that I want to do.
And I would say also, Cathy, so am I. I know what is my North Star, and it hasn't happened yet. But I watch myself stay away from it all the time, because it's so scary to put all your energy into that thing and the risk that it won't happen. It's a lot easier to not put all your energy in. And that's a very human thing.
So
and
true.
We have to take these steps. And and it sounds like you have, and I'm so sorry, experienced trauma, or I'm grateful because it's given you who you are, but it's not the same. I don't know many people that haven't suffered trauma, but when you've suffered complex trauma, it's not the same when you look at what have you achieved or what have you done, because it's like doing it with a blindfold or doing it with your hands tied behind your back. It's very important for us to acknowledge that when someone suffered severe trauma, they are literally disadvantaged physically in a way that, like, Hugh was able to go out there and just do it because he didn't ask the questions. He just went, I want to fix this and I want to do it. For me, because of what I've been through, there's this bodily question that happens whenever I take anything on that is literally autonomic nervous system neurocepting fear, because my body is too aware of what could go wrong and what that says about me and what that might impact my body to feel. And it's intrinsic, and it's not even seen, known, or spoken, but we have a disadvantage. And it's so important that we give people compassion of, like, so today's not the day you're going to do that, because your body won't let you. And that is okay.
Yeah. And, I definitely, there's a lot of time in my life where I still, without realizing it, play a small game when I want it to be bigger. But, this is not about me.
In a way, having conversations like this, your podcast and what you're both doing, especially for women who grow up in a world where being small is safer, it surrounds us by other women or other folks that have this within them, who say, go big. I'm here today to witness you go big, and I'll catch you, or I'll be there on the phone, or, like, those are the things that we didn't used to have. Because big, especially in Australia, and this is part to your question, I couldn't live in a country where being big was not celebrated. And I left Australia in 2005. The tall poppy syndrome was
wow. Yeah.
And I constantly, I believed before my trauma, by the way, my parents say I was like this before, that anything was possible. And I still intrinsically believe that. And Australia doesn't like that. I was constantly trying to be bigger, better, and I got cut down every step of the way, whether it was my family because it was dangerous, whether it was friends because they thought I was up myself. In grade 5, a girl said to me, you love yourself, don't you? And I remember thinking, I didn't know that was bad. So we are taught to be too humble, too small, too don't look at me. And I just think it's so funny that the look at me has become an Australian saying, because I'm like, that is not what Australia is like. Oh, no, don't look at me. Don't look at me. Oh, I don't want to be, that was a big thing in America. I had the sense that it was a bit different. And when I came here, I would say, well, I want to be this and I'm going to do this and I want to have my own kids shop, blah, blah. And people would go, great. That's amazing. And I'd wait for them to say, good luck. They actually mean that. They didn't cut me down. Both of you are standing up and saying, we need to support each other.
Yeah, absolutely. This is the end of part 1 with our fabulous chat with Georgia. It was so good. We've split it into 2 and part 2 will drop on Saturday, just in time for your weekend. Thanks for listening to The Change, a fully independent podcast.
We love the Australian-made all-natural skincare brand Alivio Wellness, and we know you will too.
Use code THECHANGE at the checkout to receive 20% off your next order. Whether you're seeking inspiration, curious about change, or just here for the great banter, we'd love you to make The Change your new go-to podcast.
And even better, send us your voice notes or questions about change. We'll use them on the show. Email us at changepod2023@gmail.com or DM us on Instagram at _change_pod. Find us wherever you get your podcasts. And don't forget to follow us on Instagram for more on The Change.